it's a very new approach in the sense this is still a draft, so this has not been finalized, the input about the tool, so it might change a little bit once it's finalized by the PEFA Secretariat. Okay, so to start an overview of what I will talk about, I will obviously no longer talk about the PFM. I think the morning was very good with covering that area. I will talk about PEFA more. Closer, sorry about that. Yes, and then I will talk about PFM and PEFA, like the approach we have at SECO to PFM projects and how PEFA plays into, or what role has PEFA in that approach. Then introducing these gender responsive budgeting indicators that are being developed currently, and then close on the opportunities and challenges. I think the intention is that I talk 10 minutes and that we have questions afterwards. If you have any question at any moment, please feel free to interrupt. I'm sure there will be a little bit of leniency with questions throughout. Okay, so starting with what is PEFA. Here we go. Yes, second point. The Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Program and Methodology. It's a very long-standing tool in PFM, and it has been developed in the 2000s by 7 international development partners, out of which Switzerland was one. And it's been considered a very successful such tool. Since 2005, 586 assessments have been conducted worldwide, so really a very widespread uptake. What it does, it is a framework to assess the strengths and weaknesses of a PFM system, and how it does that is by quantitative indicators that provide a snapshot, a moment in time analysis. And therefore, on one hand, it allows to establish a baseline of how a PFM system is doing, but it also allows to get a picture of how a PFM system is developing over time. Okay, coming to the SECO approach to PFM projects and how PEFA fits into that. As Rosemary mentioned in the beginning, evidence-based approaches are very important to SECO. And if looking at setting up a PFM project, the first stage here, you see the diagnostics and the establishment of a baseline. That's where PEFA has been heavily used. An assessment can deliver a good starting position to understand what a country's needs can be in the area of its public finance management system. And PEFA provides such a baseline. Then, and the second stage, it's of course not automatic from what you see a PEFA delivers of what you will actually do. And that's where I also want to make a little bit the link to question number 5 and our discussion around political powers and power considerations, when do they have to come into place? Because even if a country conducts PEFA, it will of course have several items that could be addressed. How will they prioritize, and what will be the sequencing of reform? So PEFA has been very useful in that stage as well, because it allows you to maintain a policy dialogue and to have like a common ground on which you can talk, but that still allows you to flexibility of what you will actually focus your project on. Then third stage, of course, the reform implementation that will be based on your baseline and then what has been decided your priorities should be. And then at the last stage, PEFA is again very important, where you have the accountability and the evaluation. I mean, PEFA is an evaluation tool, so that's one item. But also if countries conduct multiple PEFAs, you have an accountability tool in the sense that either change will show or it will not show. And I mean, best case scenario, you have a very strong argument. Worst case scenario, you at least have an engagement base on which you can bring up these issues again. Okay, so PEFA has been very important in the SECO approach to PFM systems at baseline and then policy dialogue and accountability. Now, the gender-responsive budgeting thematic has been taken up by PEFA, and there is a proposal for a supplementary framework for assessing gender-responsive budgeting. The definition, like what it's intended to do, you see it there. So it's supplementary questions that should collect information on the degree to which a country's PFM system is gender responsive. It is a supplementary process, so it is, you can do a PEFA and choose to do this gender responsive supplementary framework. It is voluntary. It is based on an emerging global practice, and I will come back to that point. And as we talked before, it covers the entire budget cycle. The fact that this has been taken up, the gender responsive budgeting, is clearly bears witness to the fact that the topic has become very important, and PEFA has been approached from many sides to take this up, and it also resonate, it shows a little bit this realization that budget is, as you said this morning, crucial in the in getting policy goals implemented, and the idea behind it is a little bit this logic of putting your money where your mouth is, and to make sure that you can trace that money throughout your budget cycle. It also illustrates, with being throughout the budget cycle, the shift from just allocating money to women or vulnerable groups, and to actually want to follow throughout the budget cycle, and to acknowledge that institutionalized dynamics can have an impact at every stage onto how budgets are actually allocated. Yes, so to look a bit closer into the framework, we have the next slide. And so it's very much shaped in the same fashion as PEFA itself. So there are indicators that are defined, and for each indicator there is a scoring of how a country does with regards to that one indicator. And I put you here the score for the overall PFM system, but do not fret. So if you want to see the other scorings, I put them in the annex. It's just for time reasons. I don't think we can make it through all of them. But I think from this first one, you see very clearly how it is distinguished. You have a score A, which would be the best, and D, and you have the distinction between gender equality analysis is mainstreamed in the relevant institutions. It's for a B, it's partially mainstreamed. Then you have efforts that take place, and then you have no considerations of gender are included. So you have this scales of different involvement of different progress that within a system. And a scoring like this exists for all the 10 indicators. And if you want to go through the indicators together quickly, but I think we can then go into more detail in the discussion. It covers really the whole budget cycle, and I mean all of these topics. So you see the budget policy proposal, you have both impact analysis on the budget policy and on investments. You have a gender responsive budget circular, budget documentation, then disaggregated performance information for service delivery, the budget expenditure, procurement, and I will be curious to hear more about the case study you mentioned with regards to that. Then the annual financial reports, the impact of service delivery, and the legislative scrutiny. So I think I hope this gives you a little bit of an overview of what the tool, like, what this supplementary framework to the tool is trying to achieve, and how it is, like, really quite comprehensive when looking at the budget cycle. Now, for the opportunities and challenges that we see on our side with this introduction of a supplementary framework. So, again, as I said, with the SECO approach, and that's, of course, where we see the most opportunities, PEFA is a very widely used tool, and it has been very useful for this establishment of a baseline and for the policy dialogue. These advantages will, of course, also be applicable in the context of gender issues or socially inclusive issues. So that's definitely a great promise that applying the tool holds. Then the relevance of PEFA. There are a lot of countries who do PEFAs because the methodology is very similar and it is a supplementary framework. It could have very good. It's very likely that the uptake will be good for countries that already conducted PEFAs to also conduct these PEFAs. So that's another opportunity we see. For the challenges, and I think this became a little bit apparent in this morning's conversation, the question about fragile PFM systems. What about limited capacities and data constraints? And we heard it this morning, the very successful examples that we talked this morning about. I mean, the countries mentioned were Ireland and Canada. And I mean, there is, of course, this risk of, you know, what about fragile contexts, and how can we make this work, and also how will it appear? I mean, it is, and this is another point, it is an emerging global practice. For a lot of PEFA, it's based on a good practice. It's not very aspirational. Now with this supplementary framework, this changes a little bit, and of course, there are risks of how that is perceived, of how well it will be received as a tool. It is a less technocratic discussion if it is about the supplementary tool, or at least there is a risk of that. And this is also this point about the agnostic tool versus the policy goals. PEFA had the advantage so far to be a functional approach, in the sense that the logic was that if you would have a functioning PFM system, no matter what your policy goals are, they will be realized better if your PFM system is better. The supplementary framework, of course, is based on the same logic, in the sense that working PFM systems are better in delivering policy goal, but your policy goal is a given. And that, of course, bears its own questions. Also with regards to other policy goals, like PEFA has been approached by how climate change will be addressed in the PFM cycle, what PEFA's role should be in that regards. So, of course, quite a lot of challenges that have to be taken seriously. Okay, so